Welcome, everyone. I'm Dara Rose, Senior Program Officer at the Wallace Foundation, and I'll be your moderator during today's discussion. We're delighted you could join us for today's webinar, All About Intermediaries. This is the first of a three-part series, Strengthening City After-School Opportunities, New Insights, New Tools. Each webinar highlights a new research study, report, or guide commissioned by the Wallace Foundation and developed by experts on after school. The series is co-hosted by the Collaborative for Building After-School Systems, the National League of Cities Institute for Youth, Education, and Families, the Forum for Youth Investment, and the Wallace Foundation. I'd also like to thank our many communication partners who helped us get out the word on today's webinar. They include the After School Alliance, the Coalition for Community Schools, the Expanded Learning and After School Project, the National After School Association, Grantmakers for Education, Out of School Time Funder Network, the National Collaboration for Youth, the United Way of America, the National Urban League, the National Institute for Out of School Time, Strive, Spark Action, the National Network of Statewide After School Networks, and the National Summer Learning Association. I hope you also join us on Tuesday, September 18th for the second in our series, Harnessing the Power of Data, and then on Thursday, October 11th, for Improving Quality System-Wide. So we asked you to please fill out the poll to tell us what your role is in after school. Now we can take a quick look to see who we have on the phone today. So we have a lot of local intermediaries naturally interested in today's discussion, but a really mixed mix from across the country, including program staff, some statewide after-school networks, some funders, some colleagues, thank you for joining, as well as a lot of other people who just don't fall neatly in those areas, as is common for our field. Today's webinar is designed to shed light on the role and value of intermediaries in building out-of-school time systems. It features findings from Making the Connections, the first ever national survey of after-school intermediaries undertaken by the Collaborative for Building After-School Systems, known as CBAS. The report can be found both on the CBAS and Wallace websites, and links will be provided at the end of this webinar. You'll also hear from two leaders of intermediary organizations at the local and state level who give on-the-ground perspectives on what intermediaries can achieve and how they work. Joining me today is Jessica Donner, Director of the Collaborative for Building After-School Systems. Prior to leading CBAS, Jessica managed statewide and national service learning initiatives at the National Service Learning Partnership at the Academy for Educational Development and at the Massachusetts Department of Education. We'll also hear from Liz Nuskin, Director of the Ohio Afterschool Network. Liz has worked for the past 8 years to improve city and state after-school systems in that state. Her professional experience is focused on linking individuals and organizations with information and resources in a variety of fields and settings, including volunteers in healthcare and municipal settings and juvenile delinquents with restitution opportunities. Lastly, we'll be joined by Chris Smith, Executive Director of Boston After School and Beyond. Chris has spent his entire career focused on public-private partnerships that support student learning by leading a variety of policy, measurement, and programmatic initiatives. He joined Boston Beyond in 2008 after spending 10 years at the Boston Private Industry Council. Before I ask Jessica to share the findings from the national survey, it's worth reminding ourselves why intermediaries matter. One answer lies in the historical roots of the after-school field. Many of you know the work of Robert Halpern, the Chicago-based researcher in after-school at the Erickson Institute. He has demonstrated in his important research on after-school that it developed at the turn of the 20th century as a vital, charitable response to the challenge of helping new immigrants. In these early years, after-school took shape in contrast to public schools as a fragmented and idiosyncratic sector. This is not to say that the services were not vital throughout the country. They were, they just weren't simply coordinated. As the demand for these services grew over the century, sparked in part by the entry of women into the workforce and the need for professional child care, After-school programs were asked to serve more and more children and to demonstrate the benefits of program participation. So in response to that demand, in the last decade or so, a new vision has taken shape. It relies on coordination, and it's designed to ensure that children get high-quality services. The middle of this graphic shows that after-school systems require engaged leadership, a coordinating entity, and data in order to grow program quality and boost attendance. The benefits of this approach are evident in good times, and they're listed on the right side of this slide. They're also evident in bad times when citywide systems can draw on the alliance of government, public education, community-based organizations, and philanthropy to preserve funding or to help leaders make thoughtful service reductions when absolutely necessary. As a 2010 study by RAND Corporation reported, coordinated system building efforts can work to improve access and quality. So we have a proof of principle that demonstrates the importance of after-school systems across the country. And I want to underscore the point that systems don't get built and run by themselves. They need a home, or as FSG has recently put it, collective impact needs a backbone organization. The RAND report referred to these backbone organizations as coordinating mechanisms. We here at Wallace usually refer to them as either coordinating entities or intermediaries. The coordinating role for after-school programs and OST systems more largely can be assumed by any variety of institutions depending on local context. It can be a city agency or a district, it can be an interagency committee, or it can be a nonprofit entity. Intermediaries, which have not gotten the attention they deserve, are organizations that stand between government and providers, helping to share and analyze information, advocate for supportive policies, marshal, coordinate, and deploy resources for programs, and uniting what would otherwise be disparate efforts being carried out by government, schools, and nonprofits. Before I ask Jessica to give us an overview of her important research, I'd like to remind you that we're capturing your questions throughout the session through the Q&A function. Please pose questions as the speakers are talking by using the tab on the right side of your screen. There's on the sidebar. For those of you who have already posed questions, thank you very much. So now I'd like to introduce Jessica.
Hello, everyone. I'm delighted to be joining Dara Rose, Chris Smith, and Liz Nuskin, and all of you to speak about the power of intermediaries. Thank you, Dara, for that informative introduction about the potential for out-of-school time community efforts to become more coordinated and productive. It's that very context for the out-of-school time field that inspired the Collaborative for Building After-School Systems to undertake the first national survey of nonprofit intermediary organizations. Before I delve into the findings, I'd like to quickly describe CBAS and define intermediary organizations. The Collaborative for Building After-School Systems is a coalition of leading out-of-school time intermediary organizations representing cities and regions around the country. We help communities improve local coordinated efforts to improve the scale, quality, and accountability of out-of-school time services to improve learning opportunities, particularly for underserved youth. Our intermediary partners, listed on the right-hand side of the screen, are in cities and regions around the country and include the communities of Baltimore, the Bay Area in California, Boston, Chicago, Palm Beach County, Providence, and New York City. Through policy, practice, and communication efforts, we've demonstrated models for scaling program initiatives and quality, informed systems building efforts through technical assistance, and educated federal policymakers on the value of school and community partnerships to drive quality programming and other best practices for out-of-school time policy. Dara spoke about the importance of coordinating entities and building systems. CBAS believes that through our collective experience, that having an intermediary that serves as the bridge and connector between policymakers and funders and the direct service organizations is essential for building a high-quality out-of-school time system. Intermediaries share a common set of functions. They're funders and fundraisers, evaluators, conveners, trainers, advocates, and they help build public awareness. Due to their neutrality and bird's-eye perspective on a community, they have a distinct ability to serve as trusted partners, consensus builders, and innovators. A year ago, almost to the day, CBAS surveyed the nonprofit out-of-school time intermediary landscape to better understand a few things. We wanted to know who out there is building the capacity of after-school programs. What value are the organizations bringing to communities? What are their challenges? And what kinds of support do they need to build on their progress? To figure out who is out there and their characteristics, we cast a wide net. We asked respondents to tell us about their core functions, budgets, and history working in out-of-school time. And here's what we learned. We were surprised that so many organizations, 212 actually, identified as nonprofit intermediaries and completed the survey. We asked respondents to identify as one of 6 common types of intermediaries: a local out-of-school time intermediary, which we defined as a city or county-based coordinating entity solely focused on out-of-school time; a statewide after-school network, which is a formalized consortium of 40 organizations launched by the Charles Stewart Mount Foundation; a local foundation, such as a community foundation; a multi-service intermediary with service areas beyond education out of school time, such as the United Way; a multi-site national provider, such as a Boys and Girls Club or a Y; and then we had a group of other, which wound up including a small number of public entities, national intermediaries, universities, and local providers. We found that local out-of-school time intermediaries and organizations that identify as other, as you can see in this graph, comprise the majority of respondents, close to 60 organizations in each category, followed by multi-service intermediaries. Statewide networks, while they comprise only 12% of the sample, actually wound up representing 60% of all MOT-supported statewide networks, so we felt that was a very robust sample. This sample, while strong, we recognize does not fully capture the many organizations that play important roles in building systems, such as, for example, the many public agencies out there that function as intermediaries. But for the sake of comparison across like organizations, we targeted the survey to nonprofit 501c3 organizations, but we believe the lessons are transferable and relevant to all types of intermediaries. Not surprisingly, we saw that intermediaries across the board fulfill many functions, with knowledge sharing and professional development being the most typical. Broken down in this graph by type of organization, we found that some organizations have a more specific focus. For example, you'll see that statewide after-school networks function are primarily around policy, knowledge sharing, convener, and professional development, as you can see from the tall bars, which is in line with their goals and objectives. We also learned that local foundations take on functions beyond the obvious funding, with more than 50% taking on convening and knowledge-sharing functions. Other characteristics we identified were that intermediaries typically operate with relatively modest budgets of less than $500,000 annually. They depend equally on public and private revenue streams. They are mature and survive past the 2- and 5-year startup phases. They grew out of community demands, typically out of a local planning effort. And we learned that they are needed by their communities. We tried to capture the level of external support for their work by asking if their local policymakers think their intermediary is essential. 64% of respondents said yes. Now I'd like to turn to impact. We examined impact in 4 areas: raising funding, increasing participation, improving quality, and influencing policy. Since intermediaries often advocate for out-of-school time to become a public responsibility, we wanted to learn about the mix of public and private funding and the intermediary contribution to expanding the pie of resources in a community. We found a connection between the years an organization has been working in out-of-school time and the split of public and private funding, as you can see in this chart. The longer an organization has been working in out-of-school time, at least 11 years, the more likely for them to report that their funding is mostly public, as you can see with the rise in the light green bars, representing an increase in public revenue as compared to private. For startup organizations with less than 2 years in operation, their funding is mainly private, suggesting that intermediary support for building an out-of-school time system often depends on private revenue coming in first. We also learned that organizations with more experience, at least 3 years, play an important role in raising funding, with most raising up to $10 million in public and private funding for their communities over the past 5 years. Related to participation rates, we learned that 2/3 of respondents reported that the number of youth served by out-of-school time programs increased in the last 5 years, and that where there was an increase, a striking number, 80% of organizations reported helping increase the number of kids served, even in a downturn in the economy. And similar to raising funding, we saw that more mature organizations played a role in increasing participation rates. Related to quality, we wanted to better understand to what extent communities adopted quality standards, tools, and data systems, and what role intermediaries played in their development. We learned that local out-of-school time organizations and statewide networks, perhaps because of their singular focus on out-of-school time, played the most critical roles in developing standards and tools for their communities. The bar chart you see here shows the percent of respondents by intermediary type that report playing an important role in developing standards. And shown here, you can see 80% of local out-of-school time intermediaries and close to 90% of the statewide after-school networks report playing an important role. As for a specific role in improving quality, the intermediaries reported initiating development of the standards, convening community members, and providing training on using the standards. We also learned that the 3-year mark was a turning point for the development of standards and tools. For organizations working in out-of-school time for at least 3 years, 70% of the communities have standards. For organizations working in out-of-school time for less than 2 years, a surprisingly low number, only 30%, reported having standards of quality in their community. We also learned that fewer than 1/3 of respondents reported their communities use data systems. We attribute this low percent to the complicated nature of setting up data systems. And that being said, due to the importance of data systems for improving quality and accountability, this finding suggests more intermediaries need help in financing to build data systems. Among the intermediaries surveyed, as illustrated in this chart, statewide after-school networks and local out-of-school time intermediaries report making the greatest headway in influencing policy, such as passing new legislation or establishing new funding streams. Across the board, though, however, only 1/3 of respondents indicate they played an important role in changing policy, which we see as a missed opportunity for organizations that have the potential to be effective advocates and fight for better policies and practices for out-of-school time for the long term. In addition to understanding the intermediary impact on their communities, we use this survey to also take stock of priority issue areas. We learned that intermediaries are most interested in reaching more underserved kids, with 2/3 reporting that as their top priority. Other priorities in descending order included raising funds for programs, establish data systems, which was good to hear given the small number of data systems in place based on the respondents, improve professional development, and implement quality improvement systems. We also learned intermediaries are eager for more information on building systems, funding and sustainability, and improving systems for older youth. A very large percent, almost 70% of the respondents, indicated wanting to learn more about how to coordinate strategies among stakeholders. They're interested in more communication vehicles, webinars, listservs, conferences, and peer-to-peer networking. 3 lessons emerged from the survey that we hope will be valuable to communities around the country. 1, we learned it takes intermediaries a few years to show impact related to funding, quality, and policy. Community-grown systems building does not happen overnight. We learned that as organizations pass their 3rd and 5th year in operation, they increasingly play important roles in building systems. This finding points to the need for funders and policymakers to stick with intermediaries for long-term support and have realistic expectations. If the infrastructure gets dismantled, it can take years to build back up. And second, just as intermediaries and systems are not built overnight, systems design comes in phases. In many communities, the question is where to start. This is the progression we saw among respondents. They first raised private funds, then public. They first developed quality standards, then tools, and then data systems. And these findings point to the need for a roadmap for intermediaries as they move along the continuum. And third, respondents indicate a hunger for peer learning communities and other forms of information sharing. The CBAS intermediary partners have clearly valued an information exchange and have borrowed ideas and tools from each other to avoid starting from scratch as they build their systems. This information sharing allows communities to grow much faster and more effectively. As the field continues to develop, we can fast-track progress by better exchanging knowledge and providing technical assistance. It's a webinar series like this that are a good start in feeding the strong interest in sharing knowledge, illustrated by the more than 200 people on the call today. CBAS and other peer learning communities can help push out knowledge in a more systemic way, and we look forward to doing that. I'm happy to answer questions after we hear from our next two speakers, Liz Nuskin, the Director of the Ohio State Afterschool Network, and Chris Smith, the Executive Director of Boston Afterschool and Beyond, both of whom will provide an interesting on-the-ground perspective of the successes and challenges in intermediary phases. I'm going to now turn it over to Liz Nuskin, Director of the Ohio State Afterschool Network, who will provide the state perspective.
Thank you, Jessica, and I'm happy to have the opportunity to share information about our work in Ohio. The Ohio Afterschool Network's primary work is similar to 60% of the survey respondents. We work to increase access for underserved youth to high-quality and affordable programs. We believe that by advocating and working with a unified voice, we can be successful. The more voices we have, the louder we are saying the same thing, the better we will be heard. The Charles Stewart Mott Foundation out of Flint, Michigan, has been a long-time investor in learning beyond the classroom, particularly for underserved children and youth, as a strategy for improving public education, and it's part of their Pathways Out of Poverty work. This grant making includes strengthening after school through technical assistance, research, evaluation, policy development, and also by building public support. The overarching goals of the 40 statewide after-school networks are to create sustainable partnerships at state, regional, and local levels to support policy development, support policies around resources, and then also the development of policies around quality. The Ohio Afterschool Network is a membership organization. We have over 800 diverse members. Majority of our members are providers, but they're diverse providers representing traditional proprietary child care centers, school districts, settlement houses, refugee organizations, workforce development programs, Boys and Girls Clubs, faith-based organizations, prevention, youth development focused, and many others. But also we have a number of stakeholders that are members of OAN, including public and private funders, parent organizations, educators, and public safety organizations. OAN is a program of the Ohio Child Care Resource and Referral Association, also known as OCRA. And OCRA is the membership organization for Ohio's 8 child care resource and referral agencies, which provide training and technical assistance to child care providers, including school-age child care, summer, and after-school programs. And the work is funded through the state's Bureau of Child Care and Development with federal and state child care dollars. While not after-school intermediaries, the child care resource and referral agencies do provide some functions of intermediaries, primarily professional development and technical assistance. OAN made the decision early on to not focus on training and technical assistance because this work was already being done by the child care resource and referral agencies. But happily, we're able to connect and cross-promote the work of OAN and the child care resource and referral agencies. However, as pointed out in the report, many of the statewide after-school networks do focus on professional development and technical assistance. OAN has 2 standing committees, so most of our work has fallen in the area of these 2 committees, which are policy and funding and standards and quality. So with regards to our policy and funding work, we have secured some funding. As many of the intermediaries in the report noted, they secured funding for programs. In 2006 in Ohio, we had excess funds in our state's rainy day fund, and the governor was looking for good investments. Fortunately, our leaders were positioned to influence him and his advisors to invest in after school. So there was funding for 2 years. However, unfortunately, it was not sustained. The rainy day fund was depleted and the economic recession was starting, so we were unable to get a standing line item in the state budget. OAN has positioned itself as the go-to organization for public and private funders seeking information such as quality, policy, and funding options for after school. Originally, OAN essentially inserted itself into conversations to express our opinions without being invited. But having a track record now, we are invited to participate in committees, work groups, and opportunities to provide feedback. So earlier this month, we were invited to serve on a very small focus group providing feedback on proposed changes to our state's quality rating improvement system. We have a standing position on our Child Care Advisory Committee, and we're also included in the work to revise licensing. Another important role for the Ohio Afterschool Network is to create and support after-school advocates. We collaborate with the Afterschool Alliance on federal policy and send policy alerts about state and federal issues to our members and ask them to take action when appropriate. We provide training and support in the area of advocacy for our members. For the past few years, we've had an annual State House Day for our members, and on that day we train our attendees, we prepare materials for them to share with legislators, and we schedule and follow up with those meetings. We also assist providers in scheduling legislators and other influential stakeholders, such as members of Fight Crime, Invest in Kids, to visit their programs. We promote Lights On and Summer Learning Day, and we also provide testimony at state budget hearings. Strategic relationships with allies have been very important for us in creating a unified voice on issues of shared interest. And our partners have been the Ohio Association for the Education of Young Children, the Head Start Association, the Ohio Association of Child Care Providers, and the Ohio Alliance of YMCAs. Some of those organizations have their own in-house lobbyists, so we're able to help inform their lobbying efforts on issues of shared interest, such as the state's licensing systems. Ohio has 2. Quality investments made by the Child Care Bureau and the Department of Education, and also system changes, such as an automated time and attendance system for child care subsidies that was recently implemented and unfairly impacted school-age providers and consumers. We're currently partnering with the Ohio Alliance of YMCAs and Health and Wellness Policy. In our state, child care and after-school programs are regulated by our Ohio Department of Health, the same as grocery stores and restaurants. And these regulations prevent the programs from serving fresh food and vegetables in programs without commercial kitchens. So this is an important piece of advice I would share with other intermediaries, is to collaborate whenever possible for greater impact, to extend resources, and to have that unified voice. The area of policy and funding is one where we have a great deal of work to do. We face challenges in creating a coherent system when funding and regulations create silos in our state. The 2 main funders of after school in Ohio are our Child Care Bureau and our Department of Education, and they have separate licensing rules, definitions of quality, and reporting systems. So as the report points out, it does take time to create change in systems, particularly change of large magnitude. Our other committee is the Standards and Quality Committee. Like 90% of the statewide after-school network surveyed, OEN created program quality guidelines, and they're included in our state's tiered quality rating system. We also created physical activity guidelines. We were approached by the Ohio Department of Health when they had excess funds to develop physical activities, and that would be a benefit of being a go-to organization with having a strong track record, is being approached by potential or new partners, funders, and allies. With our quality tools, we use them not just with providers to improve quality, but also with funders as well, to let them know what constitutes quality in an after-school program. We have a call later this month with members of our statewide grant-making association to share our physical activity guidelines and educate them about the role after-school and summer programs can have in ensuring children and youth are physically active and helping to combat childhood obesity. As pointed out in the report, intermediaries can connect funders and programs, not just for funding, but also for information as well. And one side note, a benefit of our connection with the child care resource and referral agencies is that they develop and deliver professional development on some of our quality work, including the physical activity guidelines. If it weren't for being a part of a national network, it's likely that we wouldn't have known about or been able to access national and multi-state initiatives that bring national resources to Ohio. Ohio is one of 6 states participating in the Asia Society's work to bring global learning into after-school programs, and 9 states participating in the National Science Foundation-funded National Partnership for After-School Science initiative. Knowledge sharing is an important benefit. It's valued by our members and contributes to quality. We have twice-monthly electronic newsletters, a website, and quarterly membership meetings where networking takes place. And these venues were able to provide information about research, funding, professional development, state and federal policy development, and opportunities to influence that policy. I want to thank the Wallace Foundation, CBAS, and supporting organizations for this report. In Ohio, we find it very helpful. It's affirming that what we're doing already is of value, and we can share it with funders and stakeholders to educate them about the role and value of intermediaries. And it also identifies for us areas in which we might want to focus in the future. So thank you for this important work. I'm going to turn the presentation over to Chris Smith now.
Thanks, Liz, and thanks to the Wallace Foundation and to CBAS for shining a light on the work of intermediaries. My name's Chris Smith. I'm Executive Director of Boston After School and Beyond, and I'd also like to validate the report's findings by portraying how one intermediary approaches its work at the local level. And I'd like to do so by answering 3 questions over the next 10 minutes or so. First, who are we? Second, with whom do we work and why? And third, what do we do? So first, who are we? In the language of the Making Connections report, we're considered a local nonprofit out-of-school time intermediary. That's a mouthful. We really consider ourselves bridge builders between school and after school, between the school year and summer, and between education and youth development more broadly. And simply put, we're pursuing Mayor Menino's goal of ensuring that every child has the opportunity to realize his or her full potential. And our work flows from the simple yet ambitious charge. The premise in our founding was, and still is, that we can accomplish more together than as individual agencies. And this is how we define our role as an intermediary in the city. It's worth noting that we were founded in 2005 as the successor of 2 organizations, one public, one private. The public one was the mayor's 2 to 6 after-school initiative, and the private one was a philanthropic collaborative that was called the Boston After School for All Partnership. And like others cited in the report, we were founded as a priority for the city, but with substantial private funding, including from the Wallace Foundation. So when you read this report, if you haven't yet, you might be tempted to think that the rationale for an intermediary is so compelling that its role would be immediately accepted by all. And that, unfortunately, is not always the case. You have to know your role in the system, whether it's at the city level or the state level, and you have to be able to carve out that role as well. So with whom do we work and why? For us, being an intermediary means drawing on what already exists, be it funding, policy, relationships, expertise, or other interests, in order to create more and better opportunities for young people. And we recognize, as one partner so eloquently explained, that you can't be both a conductor and a violin player in the same orchestra. To that end, we coordinate the major players in the orchestra. And our major stakeholders are city agencies, most prominently the schools and community centers, private funders, both local and national, and a variety of leading program providers, from neighborhood-based organizations to social entrepreneurs to national providers. And collaboration among these groups, who sometimes share an agenda and other times don't, is definitely more art than science. Even 7 years in, we continue to work on finding the right balance. Where we've been successful, we've been able to mobilize key stakeholders around shared goals, shared measures, and a shared focus on populations in need. In fact, this last point, serving high need or underserved young people, which is cited as a big challenge in the Intermediary report, is really what helps us catalyze collaboration. Having this focus calls on all of the stakeholders to raise their game and apply their strengths to those most in need. Another way of explaining it is that we have a shared focus on the denominator, and after each of us does our job, there are still lots of kids left who aren't getting what they need to succeed, and that's what tends to stimulate collaboration. Okay, so what do we actually do? We're bound by the principle that centralizing goals and measures allows us to decentralize approaches and to unleash innovation from the field so that multiple organizations of different types can play to their strengths. And this is important not just for innovation, but also to building trust and to earning the credibility we need to pursue an ambitious citywide agenda. So just as these stakeholders are playing to their strengths in the system, we're working on playing to our strengths as an intermediary and to build on our unique capabilities. Some of the ways we do that: to convene partners around shared priorities and issues. This is a key function referenced in the report, and we really see our relationships with stakeholders as paramount and also a critical asset. And by convening partners around an issue, we aspire to catalyze action among them so that we can drive innovation through demonstration projects. And by having multiple stakeholders, funders, the city, program providers, all involved in the same demonstration project, there's a shared stake in the success. And it's worth repeating, having multiple partners with skin in the game creates a stronger base of support when it comes time to transition successful demonstration projects into the mainstream policy and funding infrastructure. In order to play this strategic role in the city, we also have to play an operational one. And one role we're playing more and more is to operationalize the intentions of private funders and the city through these demonstration projects. And this role allows funders to address an issue, for example, summer learning or school partnerships, at scale without necessarily having to fund multiple nonprofits. Similarly, we do not actually conduct research or evaluations, nor do we provide professional development directly, as the report states that some intermediaries do, but we do provide the connections to those experts. And playing this role allows multiple stakeholders to be part of one agenda and play to their strengths. For us, it's critical because it allows us to build on strong relationships and maintain trust. Finally, I want to give you a sense of how we structure our activities. And we're a 10-person staff, and we structure our priorities and staff to pursue those opportunities that are aimed at our ultimate goal of developing the whole child through partnerships. And our strategy is to build an integrated learning system that draws on the best of schools and the community. So I'd like to share 3 layers of our approach, from conceptual to infrastructure to priority opportunities for demonstration. And these speak to our function in the city, not just as a convener, but as a framer of issues and opportunities and as an operational partner. So first, we begin with a common vocabulary. The ACT skills framework, and ACT stands for Achieving, Connecting, Thriving. This really allows schools and youth development organizations to be part of one conversation, and it's driving both programmatic and measurement priorities. So this is at the conceptual level. Moving down a level, we provide some infrastructure to the system. A common data system serves as a repository of information on more than 1,700 programs across the city that collectively offer tens of thousands of program slots. This is an excellent source for analysis of program supply by neighborhood, type of activity, age group, et cetera. The other part of the infrastructure is that we convene meetings for collective action and impact through what we call the Partnership Council, which was appointed by Mayor Menino 2 years ago and includes 50 of the leading out-of-school time organizations in the city. It's since broken into various work groups where we're actually getting work done together on a month-to-month basis. Finally, in order to have the system impact we desire, we realize that we have to drive innovation through practice, because practice should inform policy. And being on the ground, so we're on the ground addressing high-impact areas such as summer learning, school partnerships, which are increasingly relevant as schools extend the school day, teens and older youth, which is a high-priority population, and STEM. And we do so with partners, and that's really necessary for us. It not only allows us to share effective practices, but it informs our collective policy and funding agenda. And that ultimately is something that we can only do together and not alone. So thank you very much. With that, I'm going to turn it back to Dara Rose to conclude.
Great. Thank you so much, Jessica, Liz, and Chris. And we have a bunch of really good questions to pose. So I'll start first with perhaps the most common question, and I'll pose it to Jessica, I guess, first. And that is, how are intermediaries funded, particularly over the long term? And how do grassroots intermediaries get paid for their services? Someone wrote, most funding goes either to school systems or to large organizations like the Boys and Girls Club or even the YMCA, even though these small organizations, and I assume this person is referring to intermediaries, are competent and serve large numbers of children. Jessica?
Great. Thanks, Dara. And that's a great question, because I think raising funding for intermediaries is the number one struggle and ongoing challenge. So basically, intermediaries, so it's an ongoing challenge to raise funding for the long term. Typically, intermediaries, like providers, are fundraising tirelessly all year and year to year to cover their activities and their own staff support to do capacity building. So one of the pieces where we found where that's helped fund intermediaries for the long term and some successes have been where cities have worked with their mayor's offices and city council to secure ongoing city support for their intermediary work. Typically that's a one-year investment, but they work and fight to get that renewed year after year. The other place where intermediaries receive multi-year support is from local community foundations, typically, which they find very helpful. One tip is that for the intermediaries have been successful in working for the long term is that they've been able to concretely show their impact, demonstrate clearly how they've been able to influence policy, how they've changed the quality landscape, how they've improved accountability, and how they've raised funds. When it comes to grassroots organizations getting paid for their services, in some cases, that's tricky, but sometimes organizations charge nominal fees for training and technical assistance, but recognizing that there's not a lot of resources out there. Other intermediaries, I've seen some help community-based organizations write grants, such as 21st Century grants or other grants, and tend to involve themselves as well in the work, either as evaluators, or in other ways to help support their collective work together. Those have been some ways in which they've gotten paid for their services. But typically they're working with providers that don't have a lot of resources anyway. So really, though, a lot of the funding comes from local, state, federal, public grants, and then private foundation support.
Great. Thank you, Jessica. So now I'm going to turn to Chris and Liz. We've gotten a bunch of questions about how to motivate partnerships, and specifically someone asked, how do you motivate school boards and districts, and how do you get school boards to invest Title I funds with community civic groups that want to administer after-school programs?
So this is Chris. One way we've been able to motivate partners, and that's strong, we found that partners respond to a level playing field where a variety of them will be on the same measures, which really allows them to play to their strengths. And so often you hear, particularly from smaller organizations, that it's hard to compete with bigger ones because they don't have the visibility or the back-end or in development capability. So when you set the stage, they're able to play to their strengths, and it's really an objective way to look at them. Secondly, we found that demonstration projects that help them get skin in the game, in other words, that help them do their job and fund them to be part of the research project by actually paying for the program they do, goes a long way. You get a lot more buy-in and attention to the larger issue. And as an example of that, through the Boston Summer Learning Project, a funding collaborative, which includes the city and the school system, called the Boston Opportunity Agenda, and now the Wallace Foundation, is funding summer learning in Boston in a way that involves not only 1,600 kids in 40 schools, but 17 program providers who are learning from one another because they're all in the same measurement protocol.
And if I could just add to what Chris said, I would say data and relationships. So having data on impact on students is very important. And for example, one large district in our state was able to get the previously SES funds that our state eliminated with our ESEA waiver directed to support after-school programs because they have longitudinal data on how the after-school programs have helped with grades, school attendance, and standardized test scores. Secondly, with relationships, I do think who you know or who you build relationships and help to educate is really important. In Ohio, we've had a long-time relationship with the Ohio Association of Elementary School Administrators, which are elementary and middle school principals. And so we've been able to partner on some professional development. We've presented at their annual conferences. We've helped them plan their annual conferences. Through them, we've also got involved with the Professional Association for Curriculum Directors. So I think that has been really helpful, too, to build relationships, get understanding, have them value after school as a professional and contributor, and that can make an impact as well.
Great, thank you. I think I heard from both Liz and Chris the importance of establishing reciprocity in partnerships and also the power of data, particularly when working in academic partnership settings. So now I'm going to bring it back to Jessica. We've gotten two questions recently. One focused on how intermediaries are able to demonstrate that they are in fact a value add. And then also, what role do intermediaries have in telling the story of impact, especially for areas outside of academics? So Jessica, what are some of your thoughts about how you make the case for OST intermediaries?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and that's it was that very question that sort of framed the survey and a lot of the questions that we asked in the survey. So in thinking beyond sort of the direct impact on use, because the intermediaries are not the direct service providers, we looked at ways in which they're building capacity and concretely. And I think intermediaries need to be clear about their role in leading convening efforts to develop quality standards or tools or their training, and then the impact of that training and those tools and standards on quality. So have those mechanisms in place to show that because of these capacity building efforts, they've improved quality by X%. And there's tools out there, such as tools developed by NIOST or the Weichert Center, the Youth Program Quality Assessment Tool, that gives you ways to look at changes in quality that could be really important to show impact. Also, we've seen Chris mention demonstration projects. So that's one way, in a way for intermediaries to have their skin in the game. And that's one way in which we've seen intermediaries be innovators and lead in research and design. And a way in which we've seen impact. We've seen the Providence After School Alliance, PPV, Public-Private Ventures, did a study on their after-zone model where Providence After School Alliance established a framework and a model for after school and was able to assess, based on this model for after school, what impact they were having on school attendance, engagement, social and emotional skills, and even academics after a few years. So looking at those sorts of models, the After School Corporation, After School Matters, and those evaluations can help inform design. And if an intermediary has those resources, those are one way. That's another way to get at more direct youth-oriented impact. But I think some of the focus questions in the paper and making the connections look at sort of certain concrete target areas where an intermediary can show impact.
Great. Thank you, Jessica. And I recommend that people check out the Wallace Foundation website, our Knowledge Center on After-School Systems. One of the efforts Jessica referenced, the Providence After-School Alliance work that was evaluated by PPV, is one of the first evaluation studies to really look at the impact of a local OST system on just the things that Jessica outlined: quality of programs, youth participation, and youth outcomes that result from their participating in high-quality programs. Someone asked, why should funders give money to intermediaries for them to then re-grant? So I'm going to take that one since I'm a funder. I think there's clear pluses and minuses to re-granting as opposed to directing grants to programs yourself. Intermediaries may know the landscape really well and be able to cast a wide net to the service providers, and in that way are a value to local funders and national funders interested in particular local communities. Also, hopefully, local intermediaries that you're thinking about giving re-grant funds to might be experts on program quality and can really help screen who are the highest capacity providers. I also think that providing re-grant funds to intermediaries can enable them to incentivize programs to link into the system in effective ways by using data systems and making that a requirement of the re-granting, and also reaching high quality standards and participating in technical assistance and research that might be led by the intermediary. I was wondering if any of you, Chris and Liz in particular, have experience receiving funds to re-grant and what you thought and how you use those re-grant funds.
I can think of many reasons to fund intermediaries for re-granting, but I agree with all of yours, Dara. I think where we've been of most value to funders is that they can fund an issue or priority without having to fund multiple organizations. So there's an administrative burden that's relieved. The second is measurement. It's great to be able to get measures from a variety of organizations on the same instrument. So in our summer learning program, among other tools, we use NIOST's SEO, which is a cost-effective, validated tool. It's wonderful to be able to look across programs to identify their strengths and where they need some extra help. And finally, there's the management and reporting function, which is one of the things we do here. So I would say, in summary, the most compelling reason is to be able to tackle an issue. And as it relates to evaluation and proving your worth as an intermediary, one way to think about it is to look forward. You're helping philanthropy and others break new ground, and you're doing so as a partner more than as a grantee.
Great, thank you. I think we have time probably for just one more question, and I'm going to give it to Jessica, and that's how should local intermediaries and folks working with them use this report?
No, thanks. That's a great question. I've been fortunate to hear from folks in the field that I know and some new communities that they found the report to be very valuable in helping make the case for their work in a less self-serving way, and so that's been affirming. I mean, we hope that the report is a useful tool that intermediaries, community members, city officials can use with policymakers and funders to illustrate the value and need for an intermediary or a coordinating entity. We recognize there's an ongoing struggle in communities when you have scarce resources about allocation of funds for direct service programs versus capacity building, and we obviously don't see that as an either or, but recognize there's not enough funding to go around. But we hope that this report makes the case for the importance of infrastructure, which isn't sexy, but we find that it's very necessary. And we found ways in which the report helps show that the intermediary does expand the pie in a community, brings in more resources to community-based organizations and schools. They're cost efficient. We were actually surprised that most of the intermediary budgets were around $500,000 and the level of impact that they were able to have. So it's an efficient mechanism to improve quality and get more kids in high-quality programs. So those are some of the ways, and I look forward. Please email me. My email's on this slide on how you're using the report and any advice you have for future reports or subsequent reports or surveys to this one on how we can ask other questions and better questions and how this could be more useful to your work. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jessica, and thank you, Liz and Chris. And again, on your screen, you see the websites for WallaceFoundation.org and AfterschoolSystems.org, CBAS's website. And Jessica's report on intermediaries, as well as the slides from today's presentation, will be available on the websites. The deck from today's webinar will be available in the next few days. I encourage you all to please listen again on Tuesday, September 18th, to the webinar on harnessing the power of data. One of the questions we didn't answer today was, what are the leading software programs that intermediaries are using to capture data? That is the subject of the next webinar. And then in October, we'll tackle the question of quality, and some of the questions we didn't answer today were about the specific tools that today's presenters referenced to assess quality and to improve it. So again, thank you all for listening and participating in today's discussion. Have a good afternoon.